Introducing Punchbowl News. From Anna Palmer, Jake Sherman, and John Bresnahan. News about the people who matter, for the people who matter. Join the community at punchbowl.news.
Well, good morning. I'm Anna Palmer, a founder of Punchbowl News. I'm joined by fellow founder Jake Sherman for a virtual pop-up conversation focused on immigration with Illinois Democratic Senator Dick Durbin. A big thank you to Forward US for partnering with us to make this conversation possible.
Our mission with these events is to bring you closer to decision makers in Washington. Senator Durbin, also the number 2 Senate Democrat, has long been a member of Democratic leadership. As a friend of President Joe Biden's, as a lot of people are in the Senate, but Senator Durbin has served with him for a very long time and has been leading the effort in the Senate to find a bipartisan path forward on immigration reform.
A quick reminder to please tweet about the conversation on social media using the hashtag PunchbowlNews. And before Senator Durbin joins us for this conversation, I'm going to invite Maria Praley of Forward to give short sponsor remarks. Maria.
Thank you, Anna and Jake, and good morning, everyone. And thank you so much for joining us today. My name is Maria Praley, and I'm the Government Relations Manager at Forward US. I'm super excited to be joining you today because, as you know, it's well past time to act on immigration and expand access to citizenship. And this group knows that there's plenty of work left to do. I'm honored to be introducing Senator Dick Durbin, who has been an incredible champion for dreamers and for families of all backgrounds, and especially for immigrant families like mine, which includes DACA recipients, undocumented members, and US citizens. Senator Durbin recognizes that America is our home and that all families belong together to live in safety. He also recognizes the countless contributions that immigrants of all backgrounds make to our economy and our communities every day, particularly as the US continues to recover from COVID-19 pandemic. The contributions of immigrants have kept millions of Americans safe, fed, and cared for. Immigrants comprise some 23 million essential workers, and at least 5 million individuals among these workers are undocumented. There is no true economic or public health recovery from COVID-19 without immigrants. I know today we'll be discussing policies and legislation that can sometimes seem dry or detached, so I hope that by giving you a small snapshot of my life, it can serve as a reminder that there are very real humans whose lives are directly impacted by whatever legislation Congress passes or doesn't pass in the coming weeks and months. I came to the US from Peru at the age of 5 so that my sister could access better medical treatment after having her leg amputated in a car accident. And I've lived in the US for more than 22 years since. This is my home. And having DACA for the last few years has allowed me to pursue higher education and work in roles that I love. There are hundreds of thousands of DACA recipients like me who have only known the US as their home, and millions of members of our beloved undocumented community who are living without any type of protection that also call this country home. And while DACA has given a lifeline for many, it's no replacement for the permanent protections from deportation that only legislation from Congress can provide. I still have to live my life in 2-year increments, pending whether my DACA is renewed. And long before COVID travel restrictions made this a sad reality for millions, I had to watch my mother watch my grandmother's funeral over an iPad because we couldn't travel to Peru, knowing that if we did, we may not be able to return to our lives here due to our broken immigration system. My mother was not able to say goodbye to her mother and hug her one last time. And to this day, I have not been able to visit my grandmother's grave to say goodbye properly. Being unable to live free from the fear of deportation, even having survived the previous administration's relentless attempts to dismantle DACA, is a constant weight. I hope that today's conversations help sharpen the need for the passage of serious legislative solutions, like the American Dream and Promise Act or the Farm Workforce Modernization Act, which include a pathway to citizenship for the many people who are already making our country function every day, and for whom the stability of citizenship would be life-changing. We can't wait any longer. Millions of people's lives are on the line, and we must use every tool in the toolbox to finally pass legislation that will provide a pathway to citizenship for millions of members of our society like myself. I recently received my DACA renewal, actually on Monday of this week, which means 2 more years of some sense of security. While I feel relief, I hope that this is my last renewal and that the next time I'm applying for a pathway to citizenship created by legislation. I'm looking forward to today's conversation. I want to thank Senator Durbin once again for all his work and for not ever giving up on folks like myself. And I want to thank everyone again for joining this discussion. Thank you.
Well, thank you so much, Maria, for those powerful remarks. We appreciate Forward US partnering with Punchbowl News to make this conversation possible. And now I'd like to invite Senator Dick Durbin to join us for the conversation. Senator Durbin, thanks so much for being here.
Thanks. And let me say at the outset, there's nothing I can say about the DREAM Act that can match what Maria just said. To make it so personal for her and her family and her future, it really tells you the gravity and importance of this legislation. Maria, thank you. That was a beautiful statement.
Well, we're going to get right into it. You have been leading a bipartisan effort in the Senate to try and bring Republicans and Democrats together on immigration reform, an issue you have worked on for a very long time, come very close to the finish line, and not been able to get it passed. You convened that group last night. Can you tell us the latest out of the meeting and where things stand?
Well, let me tell you where I think we are. I believe there is a growing consensus that DACA, the DREAM Act, some version of that, is ready for passage. I have not whipped it, nor have I gone to the Republican side, but many Republicans have come up to me and said, we think it's time. And that was repeated in last night's meeting. There's always some extenuating circumstances, as you know, in the Senate that you have to take into consideration. What else would you include? How would you do it? And now the current issue, the current challenge is how can we resolve the situation on the southern border to the satisfaction of both Republicans and Democrats, that we have a plan to go forward to deal with the challenge that we face there. That has been folded into this. And you say, well, wait a minute, that's a separate issue. It is and it isn't. For many on the other side who want to join me, they believe that this needs to be addressed. I think we can do it. I really do believe it. And so we're on that path at this moment.
So let's break that down. There's a lot to digest in that bite that you just said. So in your estimate, I mean, I think part of the challenge, Senator Durbin, is in the past, that kind of incremental, it's not even really an incremental approach. That is a substantive policy change and would be a big achievement for dreamers and for the country, frankly. I wonder if you think that that's not comprehensive, and that's been the problem in the past, that people say, we can't do this, we need comprehensive immigration reform. How do you address that now? I mean, is incrementalism, I guess this is defined as incrementalism, is that appropriate at this point in time?
If you look at the comprehensive immigration bill, which we put together with John McCain and Lindsey Graham and Jeff Flake and Marco Rubio, and on the Democratic side, let me mention the names Schumer and Menendez and Bennett. We put together, and Feinstein was part of this as well. There were many elements. So I said to my staff last night, when you separate this out, when we talk about comprehensive, and then we talk about the elements that are presently being considered, what are we missing? Well, we know that we've got some version of the DREAM Act already passed by the House. We know we have the Promise Act, and that affects those in temporary protected status. We have the Farm Labor Bill, which passed with bipartisan support in the House of Representatives. And we're talking about the southern border. What have we left out from comprehensive reform? 2 things by and large, and they are not small things, they are big. And that would be the 11 million, the remainder of the 11 million undocumented currently in the United States, which we took care of in comprehensive, and we are not presently addressing directly. I shouldn't say we are not, we just haven't come to that moment where we can. And then there is a whole category of legal migration to the United States to work. So many different categories, so many different issues, that beyond farm labor is the element that is not included. It's part of comprehensive, it's not the current discussion. But I believe the starting point will be what the House has done to make sure DREAM and Promise pass and some version of farm labor passes. And that I believe the southern border is one of the tickets of admission if we want to get into this conversation.
Yep.
So do you see this as kind of a one-for-one trade? Then it sounds like basically you're kind of acknowledging border security for permanent DACA in 2021.
It's that and more. And I think that the Biden administration feels, as we do on the Hill, the current situation is unacceptable. We have been overwhelmed at the border by those who are crossing and presenting themselves to people of authority, particularly unaccompanied children, young people. And it's just overwhelmed the system. We are determined to have a humane approach to that, and it's really taken superhuman efforts. Now we have to step back and say, well, there are so many elements here that fall into the southern border dilemma. How many immigration judges do we have? What is the caseload that we're dealing with here, and how quickly can we resolve it? How can we involve the countries that are sending the most people to the United States in the solution to this problem? What is the role of Mexico when it comes down to it? How do we achieve fairness and humanity in our asylum policy and not leave it open to being exploited by coyotes and smugglers? How do we have a border that is, in fact, an orderly approach to immigration in this country? Big questions. But you know what I find? There is so much overlap between the Republicans and Democrats on these issues, not in every particular, but in so many areas. That's where we're starting.
So I want to, can we just drill down for 1 second on the border? If you remember back in the Trump era, there were a lot of fits and starts, clearly. But on the legislative side, there was always the question about how do you secure the border? What is appropriate vis-a-vis a wall, some sort of barrier, fixing old wall, putting up new wall? I just wonder if you have any initial thoughts based on your conversations about what is appropriate or what is palatable for Democrats at the border on the security front.
It's interesting, when you go back to the comprehensive bill, there were amendments on the floor that were offered that dramatically increased border security, and we voted for them.
Yep.
Billions and billions of dollars were voted for. It wasn't expressly for a wall, but it was for border security. We kind of laughingly said these border guards would be able to reach out and touch one another if they extend their arms. There's so many that we're putting into it. So border security was part of that conversation. I would say at this point, at least on the Democratic side, there is a strong feeling that the wall was never the answer, and that we should have relied more on technology and bringing ports of entry into the 21st century. So I don't see that as part of the solution. But if bringing border security and trying to have some orderly process at the border is part of the conversation, Democrats are on board for that. We just want to make sure it's done in a sensible, thoughtful way.
You spoke a little bit about the crisis at the border, the surge of refugees. Last week, the administration flip-flopped on its policy of how many refugees it was going to allow into the country. I think you put out a statement that said, "Say it ain't so, President Joe, this is unacceptable." Can you just reflect for a minute on what happened during that episode, and were there any lessons for the president and administration officials, including Secretary of State Antony Blinken, who Biden initially overruled on raising that refugee cap?
You know, I don't want to step on the story here. And President Biden met with the Hispanic caucus on this issue earlier this week, and he didn't make any express commitments. So I'm not trying to represent that he did. But I've spoken to his staff, and I believe they are reassessing the situation. They understand, as I do, that sticking with the Trump figure is just unacceptable. Through presidents, Republican and Democrat alike, since World War II, the United States has led the world in terms of dealing with refugees, and that shouldn't change. We can't go back to the Trump era when the number of refugees accepted into this country was just totally inadequate and misrepresented, I think, the real values of this country. So I believe there will be some accommodation moving forward. And let's try to put this in context. We have the greatest refugee crisis in the history of the world. We have refugees who have been vetted and investigated for years, waiting in refugee camps to come to the United States, perhaps to be reunited with family. They are certainly no threat to us, and they come here and just want their place in our society. And I will also add to you, the notion of what we're going to do in departing Afghanistan is going to create a new source of refugees. Those in Afghanistan who stood up and worked with and defended the American troops who were there are not exactly comfortable with any Taliban insurgency that might come to power. We've got to be ready to stand by those people, and refugee status may be one of the options.
So, you know this as well as anybody, but there's a lot of stuff going on in the Senate right now between you have nominees, you have infrastructure, a massive infrastructure proposal that could take, a good chunk of the rest of the year. Government funding comes due in September. I just wonder how you view immigration reform in that kind of broad array of things and where it fits in, and just how you see the timeline going forward, both overall in the Senate and with your group that you're working with.
Well, here's the good news. The majority leader of the Senate, Chuck Schumer, is committed to immigration reform, and he's told me as much this morning. And we've been working together on this for years and years. So if I can find a glimmer of hope and a path forward for us to move into immigration reform, I believe he will be totally receptive. And as chairman of the Senate Judiciary Committee, this is our issue. And I hope that even though the committee is evenly split, which is not an easy working relationship, that we can use that committee effectively in a bipartisan way of moving this issue. It is a priority for President Biden, for Majority Leader Schumer, and for many on both sides of the aisle.
We were talking before we went on stage about kind of how long you've been working on these issues and the fits and starts and how it was passed in the Senate and then that was held up in the House. Do you think this is the issue that could force Democrats to get rid of the legislative filibuster?
Well, I can tell you, it's been 20 years since I introduced the DREAM Act. People say, well, you're supposed to be such a hotshot legislator. What are you going to pass this bill? I brought it to the floor of the Senate 5 times, and I've lost the filibuster each time, which meant I couldn't hit the 60-vote margin. Majority yes, 60-vote margin no. The only exception was the comprehensive bill, which died in the House of Representatives. And so I am hopeful that we can prove to those who want to defend the filibuster that we can reach this goal under the current Senate rules. I hope we don't have to look to the alternative. I'm pressing forward with all of my strength and energy to deal with this on a bipartisan basis and do it under current Senate rules. And many Republicans who are part of it, who want to preserve the filibuster, want to show that it can be done too. So let's set out and do it.
Now, there's been some chatter out of the White House, out of that CHC, Congressional Hispanic Caucus meeting that you just referenced, that the Senate or that Congress could somehow do this on reconciliation. Is that something that you think is possible or likely, or what? How do you view that?
I don't know the direct answer to that. It has been considered as an alternative. I'm hoping that we can prove that we can do it under the regular order of business in a bipartisan fashion. That is my goal, and I'm moving forward on that. The meeting yesterday was a continuation of an earlier meeting, and now we're going to increase the timetable, increase the effort toward the timetable to get this done as quickly as possible.
Some Democrats have been concerned about how much Biden and Democrats should actually lean in on immigration reform, concerned about the impacts that it might have on 2022 and the midterms. But there's been some recent polling out there that suggests there's actually, widespread support for a lot of the proposals. Is this something that you're taking to your colleagues on both sides of the aisle to say, hey, actually there is support here. You're not going to face the blowback that you might potentially worry about in your own political future?
Let's be very honest about this. There is a force within the Republican ranks, inspired by Stephen Miller and others like him, who believe that this is the wedge issue that will help them win in 2022 in many races. I don't believe that. I think that ultimately the American people are looking for a solution. It has been 35 years since the administration of Ronald Reagan, since we have passed any type of immigration reform that qualifies people for a permanent path to permanent legal status or citizenship. It's overdue, 35 years. Everyone knows the system is just broken terribly. And so I think Republicans who will step up with Democrats and find common sense solutions will fare well in this next election. And I think I've made that case to my colleagues, and many Republicans have told me they share the feeling.
So I want to talk for one more minute about the situation at the southern border. Crisis or not, I'm curious whether you think it's a crisis. I mean, I think that's, I wonder whether it even matters what you call it. It's clearly a really bad situation. I wonder what you think the root of it is. Clearly there's problems in the Northern Triangle. Clearly there's an incentive for people to come both socioeconomically in those countries. People are paying big money to coyotes, as you mentioned at the top. I mean, as if you try to take off their partisan hats here and figure out what is going on and how do we fix it both in the immediate and in the long term. And I just think I'm curious how you think of that. I'm just sitting here today, what you would tell people.
If this were just a broken immigration system and our borders were as porous as many people claim, then we would be seeing a lot of people coming from Mexico into the United States. But what we're seeing instead is Honduras, El Salvador, and Guatemala as the major sources, Northern Triangle countries, because of the endemic local issues of security and economic insecurity in those countries. Families there are doing desperate things. They are risking the lives of their children rather than to think that they would remain in those countries, which they consider an even greater risk. It is inconceivable to me as a father and grandfather that I would turn over a 6-year-old or a 4-year-old to some smuggler who for thousands of dollars promises me that he will drop that little kid into the lap of an American authority and give them a little plastic bag with a telephone number inside. Can you imagine sending a child on an 800-mile journey with that goal? That is the desperate situation of the Northern Triangle, which has to be part of our solution to this problem. And we have to find ways as well to discourage the exploitation of these people. They are giving their life savings, year or two of their income, for these coyotes to move these children. That's how desperate they are. So we have to take that into consideration. It is part of the reality of our challenge.
And just let me follow up on that 1 second, Anna. Do you have any, how do you do that? It just seems like, the United States is diving into a really intractable problem in these countries in which we're basically asking the government and Congress and Kamala Harris, the vice president in this case, to solve what is a massive, massive societal issue in 3 countries.
But it may be intractable. It's not impossible. And this president, Joe Biden, as vice president under President Obama, really tackled this issue, one that he's passed along now to Kamala Harris, to deal with these countries, to find a way to create some incentives for the right things to occur, for them to stabilize their economies and the law and order situation in these countries. Yes, we can do this, and there is bipartisan support to do it. It is the starting point in our conversation. Then we would say something as basic as the consulates of the United States and embassies of the United States in those countries are the place where you should make application for asylum status. You don't have to go through this perilous, dangerous journey, this 800-mile journey to our border, and to flood us with people that we can hardly accommodate. That can be done, and the orderly legal process done without that risk.
We are quickly running out of time, but before we let you go, I do want to ask you about former President George W. Bush. He's made some recent comments in an op-ed and television interview that Congress should tone down the harsh rhetoric on immigration. You were speaking about Stephen Miller and kind of the Trump faction of the Republican Party, which clearly has the large portion of the bully pulpit for where a lot of Republicans are moving or have moved to on immigration reform. He voiced support for Dreamers, called for more legal immigration and reform of the asylum system, said a lot of the things that you've been talking about here today. How many differences with Bush do you think, in terms of, is he just representing a Republican Party that doesn't exist anymore? Or do you really think that he could help you kind of in this effort to try to get something done before the end of the year?
I remember the first time I met President George W. Bush. I really didn't want to like him at all. I thought, this is the man who called for the invasion of Iraq. This is a man who's, under his administration, there was interrogation techniques that were just outrageous. I just don't care for this guy. And then I met him. Darn it, I liked him. I still do. He is such an approachable person and a good person. And that has been demonstrated time and again. Some of the things he said after 9/11 about terrorism being our enemy and not the people of the Muslim faith is an example of just a heroic position taken by a president. And then came this article on immigration, which I read into the record just the other day on the floor of the Senate. Bless you, George W. Bush, for saying what you did. And will it have an impact on Republicans, Anna? I think it must. I believe that many of them want to move beyond the Trump era into a new rebirth of this Republican Party. And I hope that they'll look back to George W. Bush and some of his values that were expressed in this article as an indication of a good path for both of us.
All right, well, Senator, we're going to leave it at that. Thank you so much for your time this morning. We really appreciate it. And a big thank you to Ford US for partnering with us on this event. And thank you to all of you who joined us on the live stream. We'll be back soon with more virtual events. You can find them on punchbowl.news. Stay safe and have a great day.